Hello, everyone. I'm Liane Jackson, senior law editor at Forbes, and today I am joined by attorney Ty Cobb, who is a former federal prosecutor, and he also worked as special counsel in the White House during the Trump administration, where he helped manage the Mueller investigation from 2017 to 2018. And I'm happy to have him join us because I know that you are a longtime observer of everything Donald Trump. Of course, this is a historical moment. We are here on Election Day. No matter who wins, we have a lot to talk about. We've heard a lot about Donald Trump having an unprecedented presidency, his candidacy being unprecedented, but this campaign has been unprecedented in so many ways. It's felt like a very long time, even though Vice President Harris has only been the Democratic candidate for 3 months. I wanted to ask you, because again, you have been a longtime observer, sometime and often really critic of Donald Trump. I want to ask you what you feel the choice that the country is facing today. The whole world is watching in amazement as this plays out, but what are your thoughts?
Well, my initial thought is my opinion should matter about as much as any single other person's opinion. But the reality is, from where I stand, at 74, having spent a lot of time in government, working on the Hill, being a federal prosecutor, being an independent counsel, being White House counsel, I'm pretty invested in the democratic process and the future of the country, and I'm very troubled about where we are today, and frankly on both sides. But I do find it just startling that the country could be considering the re-election of a convicted felon, judicially determined rapist, man also facing, hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud penalties. I'm sure that the founders of our country are rolling in their graves tonight thinking that this man could be president again.
And you say you have critiques on both sides. Well, what do you believe each side is doing wrong or each side is doing right? Are there any positives? As you said, you just laid out sort of a litany of items against Trump. Is there anything positive that the country could take if he is elected? And from the Vice President Harris on that side, what is she doing wrong or right in terms of this race?
So I think from my perspective, rather than critique either candidate necessarily, I think what I find lacking in these two candidates is any principle. I don't see that any candidate has a passion for the rule of law, a passion for democracy. The Democrats run saying, help us save democracy, but at the same time, they talk about stacking the Supreme Court and eliminating the filibuster. Trump runs on, let's make America great again. It wasn't so great when he was there. There were some things that were good, certainly in the economic world. Minority unemployment was eliminated, minority wages skyrocketed, the empowerment zones worked very well. He had some very good economic advisors, but he added an element of chaos to the world scene, and that chaos is even worse now. It's more dangerous now. I think one of the dangers on the Democratic side is that our foreign adversaries feel much more adventuresome with the Democrats in power, and I think there's a reason for that. So I hate to say it, I'm just sort of pessimistic all around, given the choice that that's been imposed on us.
Well, do you have some predictions as to the results and why within a couple hours, some of the states should have some results? What are your thoughts on who might win?
So, I don't profess to have a crystal ball, and I noticed that many of the people who actually do have a crystal ball, can't figure out what's in it. I read Nate Silver today, who, reassured us all that, he can't say who's going to win. I read the same thing from Sabato and Charlie Cook. So, some of our most talented people just aren't sure. Now, I think they all seem to sense that things are breaking the vice president's way. I sort of sense that as well. I believe that she will end up victorious, but I can't be sure as the polls are about to close. Certainly, if Trump loses North Carolina, I think it's over for him. Certainly, if she loses Pennsylvania, it's very, very difficult for her. I think we'll know relatively early which way this is trending, but it could also be another election like the last election where we don't know for a week.
Well, Donald Trump had gained a foothold. I mean, he's been out of office for 4 years. He, left office with an insurrection at his heels. And he somehow was able to gain traction within the Republican Party. You mentioned the rule of law and how it appears that Donald Trump and others are flouting the rule of law. How do you feel that he has been able to rally a base, a very zealous base, in the way that he has, to where he is potentially at the precipice of being president of the United States again?
So I don't have a rational explanation for that. I'm not sure anybody does, but I think the practical explanation for that is people are dissatisfied. People see us as a country falling precipitously in terms of our relationships around the world, and they see our leaders on both sides, along with a complicit media, in my view, fueling a divide in the country that I think has already swallowed the soul of the country, and I don't see any real help on the way. I think people are really unhappy with government, really unhappy with our leaders, and that's forced people to the extremes in both parties. So I think that those are partially explanatory of what's going on, but it is unthinkable at 30,000 feet that the country could actually install as president somebody who was once president, resisted the peaceful transfer of power, generated an insurrection, putting all the legal niceties aside. I think everybody knows that's what happened, and that he could get elected again. I think that's just shocking. At the same time, we've got a candidate who didn't win a single primary vote on the Democratic side, who was installed and has relied on surrogates and celebrities to try to drag her across the finish line, fueling the concern, I think, among many voters that she really doesn't stand for anything, that she doesn't have a principled message that she's running on, other than she's not Trump. And frankly, I think the message that she's not Trump is going to be enough for most voters. But I don't think that alone is worthy of the deification that we've seen of her in some media circles.
Well, if Vice President Harris does cross the finish line, as you say, Trump has been setting the stage for legal challenges since the race began. That's sort of his MO. If he wins, what happens to a lot of these challenge complaints that he's already filed against 60 Minutes, for example? And there's some UK volunteers coming from the Labour Party that he's also filed complaints with the FEC about their presence, and on, really. They're all setting the stage. Both sides have set up teams to either counter or to fight against voter issues, things like that. But what happens if he wins, and what do you think might happen if he were to lose?
So I think a lot has already happened. Now, Trump for sure is going to continue his role as the aggravator in chief. He is somebody who demeans democracy when it's in his perceived self-interest, criticizing the security of the voting mechanisms, the voting procedures, the sanctity of ballot counting, et cetera, around the country. And as we saw last time, he won one largely inconsequential case, but he lost 63 or 4. And he lost them badly because the facts that he used were fabricated in most places, and the legal basis was non-existent. So I think we'll see more of that. On the other hand, some of these challenges that we've seen so far by the Republicans and by the Democrats have been legitimate challenges. For example, the challenge in Bucks County recently, or last week, when they closed the polling places early, preventing people from turning in
provisional voting.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Preventing people from turning in provisional ballots or early ballots. So I think, and that was resolved by the courts. Also in Georgia, I was on a series of amicus briefs in Georgia last week and the week before, frankly, contesting the new rules imposed by the MAGA 3 on the State Election Commission, where they had insisted that there be a hand count in addition to the computer tabulation, and also had insisted that election commissioners would have a right to look into irregularities, which they don't have. I mean, they can report them to the courts and they can be taken to the courts, but it's the courts, it's province alone to resolve those things. So, and fortunately, the Georgia judges rose to the occasion, as they did 4 years ago, and denied those challenges. And the Supreme Court in Georgia refused to stay those opinions pending the election. So the damage that was intended to be done has not been done. And the same thing happened, is happening around the country. There are more suits filed today. There'll be, probably 100 more tomorrow. And that may be a low number. So we'll see a lot of that. Some of the cases are designed, as you say, in Trump's playbook to sow division, sow distrust and confusion, and consistent with his game plan last time of trying to, create enough chaos and enough perception of, fraud that votes can either not be certified or certifications can be delayed, and the issue can be sent to the House of Representatives for resolution. That's still their game plan. Everything they've done so far has been designed to keep those possibilities alive. If he wins, that certainly tones it down. If he loses, he'll plow through until January 6th, when Congress will again vote to certify. So I think we're going to see a lot of this because it worked last time for him. When he was not very good at it, he's better now. So we're going to see a lot more of it. On the other hand, I think the election results this time, while all the polls suggest it's going to be a nail biter, I get the sense that it's breaking her way and that she may win comfortably. But if she doesn't, we can certainly find ourselves in the litigation battles all the way through January.
Yeah, it does seem like in the last couple of weeks there's been some troublesome issues on Donald Trump's side in terms that have come out in the media and things that have been said by his surrogates or himself, to where the tide may or may not have changed in his way. But as you have mentioned already, to some extent, undermining the media, undermining the democratic institutions like the vote counting, promoting the idea of fraud, is sort of a playbook that Donald Trump has gotten better at, and something that we see used a lot in other countries, sort of to undermine the general idea of like the sanctity and how institutions work and the rule of law and the democratic process. Is this something that may play out if Vice President Harris were to win? Is violence out of the question? Are people going to disbelieve our institutions because, again, of this undermining of the idea, which I think mostly is on Donald Trump's side, undermining the idea of that these institutions work? Is this something that you believe he's been able to sow division and bring out in his base more and more as time goes on?
Yes, I think I think not only has he been able to do it, but he's been able to perpetuate it for 4 years in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. There's something going on between him and his supporters that allows them to buy into what has been wholly debunked and disproven about the perceived inaccuracies and inefficiencies and conspiracies surrounding the counting of votes. There's no evidence to support those fears. In any election, there's apocryphal evidence that somebody voted who shouldn't have voted, or somebody mistakenly voted who shouldn't have voted, or somebody's ballot was managed in a way that caused it not to be counted. Those kind of things happen routinely, but they don't happen. They never happen in an outcome determinative way, and that's I think that's the standard that courts have gotten more comfortable with, and I think that's what you've seen the Supreme Court do in terms of doing triage in some of these emergency cases that have arisen. They've done. They've done sort of a workmanlike job of, allowing things to go forward where it protects the sanctity of the vote, but could be corrected after the election if something turns out to be wrong. And in large part, those things have been allowed to proceed because they're not going to be outcome determinative. So you can take up some of the legitimate objections, and there are many that surround voting after the fact, but I don't think you're ever going to see it in an outcome determinative way. And why Trump supporters believe it? They only believe it if he loses. They never believe it if it breaks the other way. So it's a very bizarre phenomenon in America. Trump's a very bizarre phenomenon in America, and I think the best thing that could happen to the country is for him to be in the rearview mirror and to move forward and try to reestablish our credibility around the world.
And as in the last election, as you say, he filed dozens and dozens of lawsuits, which were routinely rejected, all almost to the one. What role do you think the Supreme Court could play this time? Because again, they're prepared if it does not go Trump's way, they're prepared to file again lawsuits all over the country. They're just waiting in the wings, both sides, if necessary. Do you think the Supreme Court wants to be in the middle of this again, a la Bush v. Gore, or are they going to sort of let this play out in the same way they kind of did? I mean, in 2020, it was a little bit more. Again, a lot of them, the lawsuits didn't make any sense, and that could happen again this time, but like there was no basis for them, for the fraud and those claims. Do you think that the Supreme Court does not want to play kingmaker in the way they once did?
So I think that's an excellent question, and I think the Supreme Court watchers, you have to get to that question by going back in history to Bush versus Gore. Now, the Supreme Court didn't want to participate in that. They didn't want that controversy, but it came to them. The Democrats brought it to them, and the Democrats had made a decision, to try to apply the rules they wanted in only a couple of counties in Florida, but not every county, and that was an equal protection violation. So it made the decision in Bush versus Gore not legally difficult. It made it painful for the country. The whole thing was painful for the country. Vice President Gore, I think, did the right thing ultimately. In essence, conceding that and not pursuing all his remedies to the fullest extent. And then last time, keep in mind the Supreme Court really did nothing. I mean, they had many opportunities in all those cases to participate, but they actually didn't play a role. So this time they're already playing a role. They've had to do triage in a few cases. The only one you hear about is the Virginia case because that upset people. But as a legal matter, it was a legitimate dispute, and that there are good reasons for the result that they achieved, and the number of votes affected is clearly not going to be outcome determinative and can be remedied by people, as they pointed out, and as subsequently the Democrats have done, by anybody who thinks they were wrongfully excluded just showing up and voting, which I believe many did today. So I think so far, and keep in mind they kept RFK on the ballot in 2 states where there was a strong argument that he should be removed. But not an argument that they were willing to interfere with at this stage of the game. So I think they've played it pretty much down the middle, and I think they would like to avoid playing it all going forward. But it's set up this way now that they're going to have to play. They're going to have to participate. I think fortunately the body of election law is very clear for the most part. Precedents are very clear. The principles of trying to ensure that every vote is treated as sacrosanct, and everything is done to try to maximize the number of votes that come out. As you saw today, for example, there was a computer error in a county in Pennsylvania. Courts extended the voting hours. That may or may not be consistent with the state law in Pennsylvania, but nobody went to court to try to prevent that, at least as far as I know. And I think that's the sort of the spirit of where the voting law is, and I think the Supreme Court is largely there. I think there are going to be some constitutional issues that could mature, depending on what happens in Georgia and Pennsylvania, and perhaps Michigan. But I'm not sure that elections are going to be so tight anywhere that there's going to be an outcome determinative issue, and only in that case do I think the Supreme Court will seriously matter.
Yes, well, Ty Cobb, thank you so much for joining us. Everything is so close to your point. It's unlikely that it's outcome determinative, but we'll see exactly how down to the wire this does get. This has been a fascinating race. It's been fascinating to speak with you, and I just appreciate you joining me again.
Well, I always enjoy being with you, Liane. Thank you so much.